Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 2 in a 20-part series I'm doing covering deep dives into the personalities of all the Primarchs, with a few pit stops along the way. Do you need to have seen the other parts prior to this one? No, but it would make me happy. We aren't covering the second Primarch just yet, but I do have a plan for that if you are invested in the entirety of the progression of this series. But for now, we are covering what is probably become one of my favorite case studies for bad brain meat in the entirety of the 40k setting, which is the Primarch of the 3rd Legion, Fulgrim the Phoenician. Fulgrim is a character that I think a lot of people tend to like, though I think it's also fair to say a lot of people really don't like Fulgrim. He's up there as one of the more divisive Primarchs of the 18, 19. 18 and a half? But yeah, Fulgrim is an interesting character, one of vast beauty, but intense envy, jealousy, and incredible potential for both harm and good. With this video, you can tell by the title the tone I'm going to go for here, right? You can tell what I'm going to discuss and have generally put together the theories that I'm going to piece together. So, what really is important for me to cover before we actually get into my main theory here? I find a lot of the Primarch backstories are just set dressings to give you an idea of their identities and their issues. It, in some cases, is actually used as a means to show just how far they have fallen, but in some cases, for a few of the Primarchs, the backstory actually can serve a tangible purpose to show how they have developed as a person. Fulgrim is one of those individuals that encompasses all of these ideas as a whole. He, as a character, prior to the Great Crusade and him being reunited with his legion, is a very complicated character. So I'll hit the basic notes of his backstory before looping back to the point I want to make, which I eventually will make. So like all of his brothers, he was sent to some random, probably shithole planet, though unfortunately, he was sent to one of the bottom-ranked shithole planets named Chemos. Now, he wasn't initially supposed to be there, thanks Eldar god of meme and YouTube prankster. Chemos was a terrible planet to live on. To evoke some imagery that you could all probably find relatable to some degree, imagine an old mining town or a steel-producing blue-collar town where the mines dry up and the young laborers move away. The town slowly but surely dies, the foundries losing their product, making the town itself mostly useless to the people who live there. So take that concept and amplify it by a planet and you've got Chemos. It was work or die. They even considered killing Fulgrim rather than having him take up the resources they need to survive. They didn't. Adoptive parents did their best to raise him, but they died relatively early in his development. And here is where we get to one of my points I mentioned earlier, where Primarch backstories are usually used to demonstrate their personalities and the abilities of the individuals themselves. So Fulgrim didn't actually become the forever king of Chemos. He actually worked as hard as possible and ended up aiming with a single-minded goal to just improve the standards of living on the planet itself. Because everyone worked till they died. He wanted something that I think humanizes the character as a character, and it definitely separates him from the rest of his Primarch brothers, where some chose to rule the planet in order to show how smart they were and how good they could run a planet. Some were wanting to rule the planet because that's what they were raised to be like. He simply wanted to elevate the people of this society so that they could have time for recreation. He didn't want to rule these people, he wanted to improve their lives, which I think is a very important note to make about his concerns as a person. Art, hobbies, just being able to do something that isn't work all day or die. So, with widespread changes to the world of Chemos, it wasn't as much of a shithole as it was anymore, and we are now going to skip ahead a bit from him being on Chemos, with a few notable things that we need to tie up before we get to the end point of where I want to go before I make my major point. So for one, it is canon, apparently, that Fulgrim has had wives before. He is canonically a Primarch who has married. He just outlived every single one of his wives because Primarch. But also, Next point that I want to bring up is when he showed up to meet his legion, there was only about 200-300 members of the Emperor's Children left, and they were decimated, destroyed to maybe a fraction of what they were due to a genetic issue that had cropped up for one of many different reasons, but, I digress. The Great Crusade era of Fulgrim is spotty to say the least, as it leads to the path that would eventually damn and doom the entirety of the Emperor's Children. You all knew it was coming, lads and ladesses. The planet of the Lair. It is a planet that had been previously corrupted by the pleasure god Slaanesh, and it was the main god they worshipped. The Emperor's Children ended up attacking and murdering every single snake man they could find, and eventually they discovered a major fleshy temple where everything kind of felt like they were crawling inside of a big feller. Every person who entered that temple, as I say quite often, was damned from the start. And there was not much else that you could do to prevent it. The air was thick with a purple-pink miasma that, even for Space Marines, acted as a pretty intense soporific. The biggest thing that occurred, and probably the best example of what I want to discuss in this video, is when Fulgrim grabbed a hold of the Lair Blade. From there, it was literally just history as to what happened. The sword itself was magnificent, as if instead of it being crafted from a blacksmith, it was grown to be perfect. The entity inhabiting the sword was a being of pure pleasure and excess, a keeper of secrets, and greater demon of Slaanesh. While Fulgrim held the sword, he inevitably slowly started to lose his mind, his thoughts growing cloudy with that same kind of soporific effect while the voice whispered to him like it was his own internal monologue. The sword made him strong, it made him feel powerful, more perfect, it made him see the flaws in the world around him, and even gave him the ability to correct a lot of them on his terms, and gave him ideas on how to correct them so that he felt a bit of resolution when they were done, literally making him drunk off the power and the satisfaction the weapon gave him, and made him even worse through his own arrogance. This is the point I want to make. Fulgrim has almost a beat-for-beat feeling to that of someone battling addiction. I don't think it's out there to point this out, as I'm pretty sure it was most likely intentional to portray the character this way, but most people don't tend to acknowledge this. Most people could recognize it, but no one really analyzes the beat for beat of why it has the same steps. Like, I know we make jokes about the Emperor's Children, that they're all like cocaine, super heroin addicts in the modern day, but the come up to that era is a very interesting study upon what it's like to lose a loved one to addiction and to something that you cannot stop. Many people complain that for someone so smart, why did he not notice the voices in his head? Well, that's the point. Addiction and dependency can cause someone to act irrationally and not notice things that are clearly in front of them. And it's already been established that Slaanesh has the ability to slow the mind's thought processes. A demonette alone can corrupt a normal human, and hell, sometimes even just a slightly bigger demonette can corrupt a space marine. A keeper of secrets being at your side can slowly slow your mind's processes and remove that inhibition in your brain to think that something is wrong. So it makes complete sense for him not to have noticed the demon whispering in his head, because he could have just thought it was his own thought processes. And maybe he didn't have that kind of monologue before, but again, Slaanesh can alter your thoughts to make you think things that normally wouldn't, much like a lot of narcotic dependencies out there. Now, I'm not trying to compare Slaanesh's sword usage to that of any specific addiction, but it is something to take in mind. It's kind of similar to what I discussed in the Lion video, where everybody complained, why did Lion get the shield? He should have got the sword. And I'm like, it defeats the purpose of the arc they're trying to portray. And while I bring up the Lion, I will add a bit of an anecdote that I hate getting too personal, but I have had past friends and family who ended up battling with serious addictions, and I have lost some friends and family to dependencies on substances. I don't like to give out my personal information, but I used to live in a place where there was a serious painkiller addiction, specifically Oxycontin. And because of that painkiller distribution and that being the main trade for the kind of impoverished community that I lived in, I had to see a similar downfall to that of Fulgrim. And I know that's kind of comparing a really dark situation to a fictional character, but it's how I can relate to this character, and it's how I can see the beats that the character was going for. The destruction of a person's personality and life through dependency is something that I don't want to say I know very well. I've never battled with it myself, but I have seen friends that have gone through it, and seeing how a lot of his brothers, his best friend, Ferrus Manus, reacted to seeing him the way that he did, I relate. And I understand. And I think a lot of you too, once I've kind of made this analogy. And seeing how addiction can progress throughout the years of abuse, it has really made me appreciate Fulgrim, like I was saying. He lashes out at those around him for the slightest bit of criticism, but those who praise him without thought end up being considered his favorite person for a period. But with most Primarchs, getting their attention can be stressful, and here's the most dangerous part. Fulgrim had a very different aura about him. It's explained that even when Rabute Gilliman, one of the calmest and most rational Primarchs, gives you his full attention, it's like being gazed upon by the full view of the sun. But with Fulgrim, it was similar to how they describe JFK, John F. Kennedy, and how when he gave you his attention, you felt like the single most important person in the universe. So he himself was perpetuating this idea that as long as you agree with Fulgrim, everything is going to be alright, right? He killed people who didn't deserve it, and his dependency on how the Lair Blade spoke with him and warped his mind made it so that he did things that Fulgrim honestly never would have before. The key moment that I see here, and the key moment in most untreated cycles of addiction, is that rock bottom they inevitably hit. You will do more and more to get what you want no matter the cost. And in this case, the cost was the life of his best friend and brother, Ferrus Manus. Now, I critique the book Fulgrim and the Horus Heresy a lot, as it was a lot of information crammed into one space. I honestly still believe that the book should have been divided into 2 to 3 different books, but one of the few moments I think is handled beyond very well is when Fulgrim succumbs to the Blade's influence in its entirety for the second or third time on the battlefield and kills his brother in a fit of petulant rage. He collapses to the ground, sober, and realizes what he has done. This is his rock bottom moment, where the substances wear off and he is left with just this empty feeling of regret, knowing that he has finally done something that he cannot come back from. But unfortunately, they don't ever tell you that when you hit rock bottom, it doesn't necessarily mean you immediately get better. There is this idea that I've seen where if you hit rock bottom, you can seek help and get the support you need, but very often people don't have those support networks, or they don't see themselves as having those support networks, so they start digging. They go deeper. They go further down than rock bottom, and he succumbed to his demons. Pun intended, of course, and it has led him to nothing more than a slave to his addictions forever. His obsessions, rather, would be a better way to describe it, as that seems to be the main route that they're going with this. So what is there to learn from this incredibly depressing tale? Who really is Fulgrim? And what is the important aspect of this to note? Fulgrim is a complex character who is warped by the losses and indignity of the world around him. I often feel that the most dangerous emotion that a person can feel is boredom. And Fulgrim is a case where when you mix someone who has lost hundreds of loved ones and grown numb to those around you, the simple inclusion of something different can cause a downward spiral that could destroy a star system. He's lost wives, he's lost parents at a young age. He showed up to an army 200 strong while his brothers had more than 1,000 times more than that, and he wanted to be more than he was. The only thing anchoring him was the fact that he finally had someone whom wouldn't die of old age before he did, and that was his best friend and brother, Ferrus Manus. So when you grow numb to the plights of others around you and the only person you have dies, well, you're left with very little decision-making in the process, and so he succumbed to Slaanesh. He's a very sad character that simply wants to be good at what he does, and it's never enough. He is never perfect enough. I do think it's very apropos that most Slaaneshi demons become crabs or with pincer-like appendages. The needle pricks of a lover's scorn is kind of the key element to the design, with very minute details of scales, because snakes have often been mixed with sin and depravity in terms of the majority of fiction out there. But Fulgrim has mostly become entirely snake. And I think it's very appropriate, as I was saying, because a very common symbol of addiction that I see is the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. And for as long as Slaanesh exists, or the Emperor is a bag of cloth and bones sitting on a golden lawn chair, he will always be a part of that self-gratification cycle of obsession that ends in nothing more than stagnation, depravity, boredom, and seeking the next bit of pleasure. This video was incredibly depressing, and I think it's important to cast aside the jokes from time to time to talk about the serious aspects of the stories. So, what do you think about Fulgrim? Think he's interesting? Think I'm just being pretentious and overly pontificating over some weird snake man? Think I don't know what I'm talking about? Yeah, probably. Let me know in the comments. Alongside that, remember to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel immensely. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching. And yes, I know he technically became a snake demon because the lair were snake people. I don't care, I'm trying to be a faux intellectual here, you ding-dong.